At 6:15 on the morning of September 20, 1944, fog lay thick over the fields near Aracourt, France. It was the kind of fog that swallowed men, machines, and entire armies. Somewhere beneath that white silence, German Panther tanks were moving heavy steel Predators advancing toward American positions that were already breaking under pressure. On a muddy strip of earth, barely worthy of being called an airfield, a small fabric-covered airplane waited, a Piper L4 Grasshopper. No armor, no guns. 65 horsepower, cotton wings, stretched over wooden ribs, a plane designed to watch wars, not fight them. Beside it stood Major Charles Carpenter, 32 years old, a high school history teacher from Illinois before the war, a man who once explained battles using chalk and textbooks. Now, he was about to fly directly into one, bolted to the wings of his observation. Plane were 6 bazookas. No Army manual approved this. No engineer had signed off on it. By every calculation, the aircraft was overloaded. By every rule of survival, what Carpenter was about to do was irrational. Observation pilots were supposed to stay high, stay quiet, stay alive. German troops usually ignored Cubs altogether. They were harmless. Too small. Carpenter knew better. For months, he had circled above burning American tanks, watching crews die inside steel hulls that could not match German armor. He had marked positions, called coordinates, done everything he was allowed to do, while men below paid for that caution with their lives. That morning, the fog meant artillery was blind, fighters were grounded, tank destroyers were scattered, and German Panthers were advancing again. Carpenter climbed into the cockpit alone. No observer, no radio operator, just 18 rockets, angled upward from his wings, and a plane never meant to dive at tanks. Nobody knew if the rocket exhaust would ignite the fabric. Nobody knew if the overloaded Grasshopper could pull out of a dive. Nobody knew if he would survive the first attack. The engine coughed, then caught. The small aircraft rolled forward, heavy, reluctant, alive. By noon, one of two things would be true. Either Charles Carpenter would be dead in a French field, or German tank crews would learn that even the smallest aircraft could kill them. At 6:42, Charles Carpenter released the brakes on his overloaded Piper L4, nicknamed Rosie, the Rocketer. The fog that had blanketed the Aracourt fields since before dawn clung stubbornly to the ground, hiding German Panther tanks and American Shermans alike. Carpenter's plane, a flimsy 765-pound observation aircraft, now carried an extra 90 pounds of bazookas and rockets. Every movement in the cockpit was a fight, the throttle stiff, the rudder sluggish, the ailerons heavier than ever. His heart raced not from fear, but from the knowledge that what he was about to do had never been done. He remembered the first tanks he had watched burn 2 days prior. 11 Shermans destroyed, crews scrambling, some engulfed in flames, their screams barely audible over the distant artillery. The American 75mm guns could not reach the Panthers at a safe distance. The Germans had used fog to advance, unseen, encircle American positions, and inflict maximum carnage. Carpenter had been forced to watch helplessly, circling above, marking targets, radioing coordinates while men he had never met became statistics. That morning, he resolved, would be different. The Grasshopper lurched forward, tires sinking into mud, then lifted into the mist. Every foot of climb required precision. Every bank tested the limits of his plane's fabric-covered wings. Carpenter maintained 1,500 feet, throttling back to a steady 75 miles per hour, scanning the ground for movement. The landscape emerged in patches: gray fields, muted forests, the slow glint of the Rhine Canal reflecting the pale sky. He traced systematic patterns, north to south, east to west, seeking German armor hidden beneath the fog. At 11:07, visibility improved. 3 miles northeast of Aracourt, he spotted them, 6 Panther tanks, advancing with armored cars, and infantry trailing behind. Carpenter's mind calculated distances, angles, wind, and gravity. The M9 bazooka had a 300-yard effective range. To hit the tanks, he had to dive, aim the entire aircraft, fire, and pull up before German infantry could respond. He descended to 800 feet, the fog partying like curtains, revealing the heavy green silhouettes of German armor. The first attack run required him to exploit every skill he had ever learned. Sun, behind him, he dove from 1,200 feet, the Grasshopper accelerating to 90 miles per hour, wings vibrating under the strain of mounted bazooka. Smoke trailed from the rockets as he pressed the firing switch. The lead Panther shuddered under impact, its engine stalling. It was immobilized, not destroyed. German infantry opened fire with small arms. Bullets ripped past, one punching through the left wing, another striking the tail. Carpenter pulled up, climbed, and readied for the second attack. The Grasshopper responded sluggishly, but the maneuvers worked. By noon, 1 Panther was burning. 2 were stopped. The German formation scattered. Carpenter turned west toward the airstrip at Long, glancing at fuel 9 gallons, just enough for a reload and another source. Ground crew met him, noting bullet holes, scorch marks, and empty bazooka tubes. Fabric scorched but intact. the design holding just long enough. 6 minutes later, reloaded. Carpenter climbed again. 11 rockets remained. The fog had lifted. German positions were now fully visible. 8 Panthers moved south along a tree line east of Bazooka, infantry advancing with them. Combat Command, A, spread across 12 miles, was vulnerable. Artillery would take minutes to adjust. Carpenter had seconds. He dove again, repeating the same calculated pattern. Throttle forward, nose down, winged bazookas arcing upward. German infantry adjusted, anticipating, but Carpenter changed his angle, flying low, exploiting terrain for concealment. Rockets hit lead Panthers. Engines stalled. Turrets froze. Tanks scattered. Small arms fire raked his fragile fuselage, tearing fabric, rattling metal. Each impact tested the limits of Rosie's structure. Carpenter ignored the vibrations, the fraying cables, the heat rising in the engine. The mission was survival. Yes, but more importantly, it was rescue. 20 American soldiers, trapped without artillery support, relied on him by 1334. Carpenter located the Waterpoint crew, 5 trucks in a small clearing, surrounded by advancing Panthers. He assessed positions, distance, cover, enemy trajectory, calculating which targets could be disabled with the remaining rockets. Engine temperature climbed. Oil pressure dropped. The aircraft shuddered with each maneuver. Carpenter had to attack now, or risk the annihilation of the trapped Americans. He descended to 500 feet, keeping below effective anti-aircraft range, approaching from the west, using trees for cover. He arced into a 38-degree dive, firing rockets in rapid succession. Panthers were hit, some immobilized, some burning. German anti-aircraft positions were confused, reacting to empty air as he exploited unpredictable attack angles. The Grasshopper trembled with every shot. Fuel was running low. 5 rockets remained, engine barely functioning. Yet Carpenter continued. Every pass was a battle against physics, aerodynamics, enemy fire, and the limits of human endurance. By mid-afternoon, 2 Panthers destroyed, 2 immobilized, 20 Americans alive. Carpenter's plane, now damaged and vulnerable, turned back toward Loneville. The glide was harsh, torn fabric, unresponsive rudder, trembling ailer. He maintained focus, adjusting flare and trim, eyes on the muddy field. The landing was rough, nose dug into soft earth tail first, plane flipping forward, but he emerged, mostly unscathed. Scratches, bruises, shaken but alive. Carpenter had survived his first combat bazookas. He had proven that a fabric observation plane could disrupt armored formations, save lives, and change battlefield tactics. The 4th Armored Division gained precious hours. Survivors owed their lives to one man's ingenuity and courage. The story of Bazooka Charlie had just begun. By late morning, Carpenter had completed his first attack runs and returned to Loneville for a rapid reload. The ground crew worked efficiently, sliding fresh M6A3 rockets into the 6 M9 launchers. Every rocket weighed over 3 pounds, each carefully secured. Carpenter's Grasshopper, Rosie the Rocketer, already bore bullet holes, scorched fabric, and rattling metal. The plane seemed fragile, yet it had survived the impossible. Within 14 minutes, Carpenter climbed again, engines groaning, wings trembling under the added weight. He pushed back into the thickening battlefield, eyes scanning the horizon for German armor. The fog had lifted entirely by 12:30. Sunlight revealed the scarred, Terran-burnt Sherman tanks, churned earth, scattered infantry. Carpenter located the next German formation, 8 Panther tanks moving south along a thin tree line east of Bazooka, supported by infantry and half-tracks. The 4th Armored Division's positions were precarious. Artillery was too far, slow to range, and risked hitting American troops. The Waterpoint crew, 20 men trapped in a small clearing, needed immediate assistance. Carpenter's mind raced with calculations, altitude, rocket trajectory, wind, and distance. Each number could mean the difference between life and death. He climbed to 1,500 feet, sun behind him, planning a diving attack. The Grasshopper, now a glider, in some ways, due to the accumulated battle damage, responded sluggishly to inputs. The wings creaked ominously, cables fraying, metal straining. Carpenter adjusted throttle, ailerons, rudder. Every control had to be deliberate. He descended to 500 feet, using terrain for concealment. German infantry were alert now, trained by the first wave of attacks to track low-flying aircraft. Rifle and machine gun fire snapped around him. Tracers zipped past wings and fuselage. Carpenter kept calm, manipulating the plane as if it were an extension of his own body. The first dive targeted the lead Panther, nose down 35 degrees, accelerating to 90 miles per hour. The M9 launchers fired, rockets streaking toward the target. The lead tank shuddered under impact, engine smoking, immobilized. German infantry scrambled, firing, ducking, shouting orders, trying to regroup. Carpenter pulled up, weaving the Grasshopper, avoiding concentrated fire. The second dive approached another Panther, slightly to the right, 110 meters range. Rockets launched, armor pierced, turret forced open. Secondary explosion rocked the vehicle. Flames erupted, German crew scrambling. The Grasshopper vibrated, wings quivering under the recoil. Controls responded, but slowly. Carpenter pressed on, ignoring minor alarms from the gauges. Oil temperature rose. Engine groaned. The plane, a fabric-hand-wood aircraft, held together against improbable odds. By 1321, the Waterpoint cruise position was in sight, a clearing with 5 trucks, surrounded by 4 advancing Panthers, infantry moving with them. Carpenter's eyes measured distance 350 to 800 yards. The trucks were American, men firing small arms, but powerless against tanks. Fuel low, only 10 rockets remaining. Grasshopper heavily damaged. Carpenter calculated risk. Dive now, attack fast, or circle uselessly while Americans were overrun. He chose the attack. Descending to 300 feet, he adjusted for the damaged elevator and frayed control cables. Nose down 38 degrees. He aligned with the lead Panther. German soldiers raised rifles, machine guns, but the dive was unexpected. Rockets fired in rapid succession. Impact near turret. Engine stall. Crew scrambling. Flames consumed the tank. Carpenter pulled up hard, barely clearing the tops of the remaining Panthers. Weaving in anticipation of anti-aircraft fire, he lined up the second target, firing 2 rockets simultaneously. The recoil made the Grasshopper roll violently, yet it held. The target Panther was hit. Turret penetrated. Engine smoking. The Germans were forced to scatter. Panic rippled through their formation. Carpenter had 5 rockets left. Engine shaking violently, oil pressure dropping. Damage cumulative. Every maneuver pushing the L4 beyond its design limits. The final dive approached the last Panther. 120 meters from Carpenter, 350 yards from the trapped Americans. He armed the remaining 3 rockets. Nose down 40 degrees, speed 95 miles per hour, low enough to avoid expected anti-aircraft fire angles. The simultaneous launch nearly tore the right wing off, but 3 rockets hit, 1 turret, 1 engine, 1 track assembly. The vehicle's ammunition storage detonated internally, hurling debris. Flames enveloped the tank. 2 Panthers destroyed, 2 immobilized. 20 Americans were now alive, scrambling to trucks, moving out while German infantry retreated. Carpenter's Grasshopper, critically damaged, had accomplished the impossible. Engine seized intermittently during the retreat. Propeller ground against rising friction. Oil leaked. Smoke enveloped the cockpit. Carpenter glided, trimming the controls, adjusting for torn fabric, frayed cables, damaged ailer. He spotted a muddy field northeast of Loneville. Tailwheel, first landing, nose dug into soft soil, plane flipped forward, inverted. Carpenter escaped through the jammed door, bruised and shaken but alive. Rosie the Rocketer had survived her first major combat mission. The consequences of this sortie were immediate. German commanders no longer ignored Cubs. Infantry carried anti-aircraft weapons alongside armor. Panther and Tiger units posted observers specifically to track L4 south. Carpenter's attack had changed doctrine, instilled fear, and saved lives. The mission demonstrated that audacious tactics could overcome superior enemy armor. The 4th Armored Division now had precious minutes to regroup, reposition, and continue their fight. Carpenter, a high school history teacher turned combat innovator, had taken the unarmed observation plane into the firestorm of Aracourt, defying conventional tactics, physics, and odds. Rosie the Rocketer had proven that ingenuity, courage, and precise calculations could turn the tide, at least for a critical few hours in September 1944. By mid-afternoon, Carpenter's adrenaline was still surging. Rosie the Rocketer bore the scars of combat. Torn fabric wings, frayed control cables, scorched fuselage, and bullet holes peppered across her frame. Yet despite the damage, the L4 Grasshopper was still flying. Every vibration, every creak of wood and metal reminded Carpenter that the margin between life and death had never been thinner. But he could not rest. German armor was still advancing, and the trapped Waterpoint crew depended on him. At 1445, he circled the clearing once more, assessing the positions of enemy armor and infantry. 4 Panthers remained operational, each flanked by half-tracks carrying infantry. The survivors of the first attack were scattered, regrouping as best they could. Carpenter calculated his attack runs meticulously: altitude, dive, angle, wind direction, rocket trajectory, speed, and the damaged plane's sluggish response. Every variable had to be perfect. One miscalculation would mean death, not just his own, but the Americans below. He chose a shallow dive from the west, using the terrain as cover. Trees, slight ridges, and undulating farmland would conceal his approach. Carpenter lowered altitude to 250 feet, engine humming, wings quivering under the stress. Rifle fire cracked below, tracers bouncing off the fabric. The Grasshopper responded slowly to rudder inputs, yet Carpenter adjusted with precise, almost surgical, movements. He aligned the first pair of M9 bazooka tubes with the lead Panther. Distance, 120 meters. Dive angle, 35 degrees. The rockets fired simultaneously. The recoil jolted Rosie violently. Metal groaned. The first rocket struck the Panther's turret, piercing armor. The second hit the engine compartment, smoke billowing immediately. Secondary explosions rocked the tank, hurling dirt and debris into the air. German infantry scrambled, firing wildly at the flying cub. Carpenter pulled up sharply, wings creaking under the stress. The Grasshopper trembled with every gust of wind, the engine temperature spiking dangerously. Next target, a Panther attempting to flank the trapped Americans. Carpenter adjusted for the damaged elevator, forcing the nose down harder than usual. He descended to 200 feet, closing in at 95 miles per hour. The M6 rockets streaked forward, slicing through the sky. One rocket struck the tank's track assembly, immobilizing it. The other hit the engine compartment, starting a fire. Flames engulfed the vehicle, forcing the German crew to bail out. The American soldiers below cheered, but Carpenter could not afford relief. 3 Panthers remained, still advancing. Time was critical. Fuel gauge, read 5 gallons. The Grasshopper's engine coughed intermittently, oil pressure dropping, a metallic rattle echoing from the cowling. Carpenter calculated, one final attack, run. He climbed to 400 feet, banking around German positions, lining up the last 2 Panthers. The first dive, 38-degree nose down, aimed at the rear Panther. German infantry opened fire preemptively. Tracers zipped past wings and fuselage, bullets pinging the stressed metal. Carpenter fired 2 rockets. One hit the turret, the other the engine. Flames and smoke erupted. The tank immobilized. The final Panther was now the only obstacle between the Americans and safety. Carpenter lined up from a steep angle, using a tree line to hide his approach. Nose down 40 degrees, 100 miles per hour, altitude 150 feet, dangerously low. 3 rockets armed on the right wing. Last chance. He fired all 3 simultaneously. The recoil nearly ripped the wing off. Rockets hit with surgical precision. Turret pierced. Engine destroyed. Ammunition detonated internally. Flames shot into the sky, smoke trailing over the French countryside. The Panther exploded, leaving no chance of re-dash engagement. The waterplane. Crew scrambled into their trucks and began retreating under cover of Carpenter's attacks. The German infantry was disoriented, having lost 4 tanks and 2 immobilized. Their formations scattered. Carpenter's Grasshopper, critically damaged, had achieved what conventional forces could not, delaying the enemy and extracting the vulnerable Americans alive. Now the return flight to Loneville began. Engine oil leaked, temperatures dangerously high, rudder sluggish. Carpenter trimmed the Grasshopper, maintaining 65 miles per hour glide speed, navigating torn wings and failing elevator cables. Fields and tree lines were all that stood between him and survival. At 1,000 feet, Rosie the Rocketer wavered. But Carpenter's calm and precise adjustments kept her in flight. He spotted the airstrip in the distance. The ground crew had cleared it, ready for emergency landing. Descending slowly, Carpenter prepared the tailwheel first, landing on soft soil, avoiding trees and obstacles. The impact flipped Rosie forward, inverted, but Carpenter escaped, bruised and battered, alive. Fire crews extinguished leaking fuel before ignition. Minor cuts and bruises, no broken bones. He had flown 3 sorties, expended 18 rockets, destroyed 2 Panthers, immobilized 2 more, and saved 20 American soldiers. Carpenter's attacks were not only tactical victories, they were revolutionary. German infantry and armor commanders now treated Cubs as lethal threats, reassigning spotters, anti-aircraft weapons, and defensive measures. Observation planes were no longer ignored. Carpenter, a history teacher turned combat innovator, had transformed the battlefield with courage, precision, and innovation. By evening, Rosie the Rocketer sat damaged but intact, her legacy cemented in the minds of both Allies and Germans. Carpenter's daring actions demonstrated the power of unconventional tactics and human ingenuity against overwhelming odds. The 4th Armored Division could regroup, reorganize, and continue the fight against the German 5th Panzer Army. Carpenter, meanwhile, had proven that one man, flying a 65-horsepower fabric plane, it could alter the course of a battle with audacity, mathematics, and fearless execution. The sun hung low over the rolling fields near Aracourt, casting long shadows across the mud-caked roads and shattered hedges. Carpenter knew that survival wasn't guaranteed even now. Rosie the Rocketer, stripped of structural integrity, creaked with every gust of wind. The rudder responded sluggishly. The torn wings trembled under aerodynamic stress, and the engine emitted alarming metallic groans. Yet despite the peril, Carpenter had no choice but to continue. German forces were regrouping, and the 4th Armored Division's position was still precarious. By 1530, reconnaissance reports confirmed more enemy armor moving toward the forward positions. The Germans were adapting. They no longer charged blindly. They coordinated, their infantry providing cover for advancing Panthers and Tigers. Carpenter understood that a repeat of the previous attack required precision, patience, and a keen understanding of risk. With his remaining 10 rockets, he formulated a plan. The first target, a pair of Panther tanks attempting to flank American troops near a small grove east of the main road. He approached from the south. keeping altitude at 300 feet to avoid anti-aircraft fire, using the undulating farmland and tree lines as concealment. Rosie's fabric wings vibrated violently, cables frayed from prior dives. Carpenter adjusted throttle and ailerons carefully, each movement deliberate. He lined up the first pair of M9 bazooka tubes toward the lead Panther. Distance, 140 meters. Dive angle, 32 degrees. The rockets ignited, streaking toward their targets. The first Panther's turret exploded, fire erupting from the engine compartment, immobilizing it. The second rocket clipped the rear armor of the flanking tank, causing a minor explosion that threw debris across the field. German infantry nearby ducked behind trees and half-tracks, firing rifles and machine guns at the flying cub. Carpenter's heart pounded, but his hands remained steady on the controls. Pulling out of the dive, Rosie responded sluggishly, but he managed to climb to 500 feet. Reassessing the battlefield. Carpenter now had 8 rockets remaining. He circled the area, noting German infantry positioning and tank movements. Spotting a Panther attempting to regroup behind a small ridge, he calculated a steep dive attack. Altitude, 400 feet. Speed, 100 miles per hour. Dive angle, 38 degrees. He fired 2 rockets simultaneously, both striking the tank's top armor. Smoke rose immediately. The vehicle's engine flamed, forcing the crew to abandon it. The remaining Panther began to retreat, its crew hesitant to advance after witnessing the destruction of their comrades' tanks. Meanwhile, Carpenter observed American soldiers advancing to reclaim lost positions. They were cautious but emboldened by Rosie's attacks. He realized the psychological effect of his aerial assault. German forces were wary of observation, planes armed with bazookas, altering their approach, slowing their advance, and losing coordination. He had created a tactical advantage that extended beyond physical destruction. The mere presence of Rosie disrupted enemy strategy. At 16:15, Carpenter made a quick assessment. 2 Panthers destroyed, 1 immobilized, 5 rockets left. German infantry were now digging in, preparing anti-aircraft positions along the flanks of the armored units. A direct dive from altitude would be suicidal. Carpenter adjusted his plan, low-level, terrain-following maneuvers, using the folds of the fields and small groves to mask his approach. He dipped to 150 feet, weaving around tree lines, engine whining under strain. The final rocket salvo would target the immobilized Panther, blocking the American advance. Carpenter lined up the aircraft carefully, compensating for the damaged rudder and frayed cables. At 120 meters, dive angle, 35 degrees, he fired 3 rockets. The explosion destroyed the Panther completely, eliminating the final immediate threat. The Americans below cheered and moved to reclaim the area, while Carpenter leveled off at 300 feet. Glancing at the remaining 7 rockets with a mix of relief and concern, fuel was now critical. Rosie had less than 4 gallons left, enough for a controlled glide back to Loneville airstrip if he didn't push the aircraft too hard. Carpenter calculated descent paths, factoring in wind, damaged control surfaces, and potential obstacles. He flew low, following the river and hedgerows, avoiding open fields where German troops could take shots. The Grasshopper shuddered with each gust, wings creaking ominously, but Carpenter maintained control, balancing adrenaline and calculation. By 16:55, the airstrip appeared. Ground crew waved frantically, signaling readiness for landing. Carpenter eased Rosie into a low approach, engine coughing and temperature rising dangerously. Tailwheel first, he landed on soft soil, sliding slightly due to mud, but the Cub came to rest without flipping. Carpenter jumped out, exhaustion hitting him, covered in oil and sweat. The ground crew immediately examined Rosie: torn fabric wings, frayed control cables, scorched fuselage, and still precariously holding together. Even after landing, the battle's impact was clear. Carpenter's actions had bought time for American forces to regroup, delayed German advances, and altered enemy behavior. The psychological edge was evident. German units now regarded observation planes with caution. Infantry carried dedicated anti-aircraft weapons, and armored units posted spotters specifically to monitor. Carpenter had rewritten the battlefield's tactical rules through audacity, ingenuity, and sheer courage. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in hues of orange and gray. Carpenter knew the day wasn't over. Rosie the Rocketer, patched together with courage and jury-rigged metal, still had rockets remaining, and more German armor was moving in from the northeast. The 4th Armored Division relied on every advantage, and Carpenter's aerial interventions had become one of their few unpredictable elements. Every second counted. At 17:20, Carpenter assessed the battlefield from 1,200 feet. German forces were regrouping, artillery now firing intermittently, and infantry advancing cautiously behind smoke screens. His engine groaned under the strain, radiator overheating, oil pressure fluctuating dangerously. Rosie responded sluggishly to controls. A dive to steep might rip the wings entirely. A turn to sharp could stall the engine. Yet despite the danger, Carpenter had a mission: protect American soldiers, disrupt German momentum, and buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Scouting along the tree lines, he spotted a column of 5 Panther tanks and accompanying half-tracks moving parallel to the road east of Bezange-Lippet. Infantry spread out, rifles and machine guns scanning the sky, anticipating another L for assault. Carpenter calculated distance and angles. Low-level terrain flying offered some concealment. He dropped to 200 feet, skimming the treetops, engine whining as the damaged rudder strained with every maneuver. With 5 rockets remaining, Carpenter lined up on the lead Panther. Range, 130 meters. Dive angle, 33 degrees. He fired 2 rockets in rapid succession. The first struck the engine deck, sending flames upward. The second clipped the turret, forcing the crew to abandon the vehicle. The remaining Panthers scattered, retreating behind hedgerows and ridges. Carpenter climbed to 400 feet, circling to reassess the battlefield. German infantry, shaken by repeated aerial assaults, attempted to establish anti-aircraft positions along the advancing armor. Carpenter noted their movements carefully, adjusting his flight path to avoid concentrated fire. His engine rattled violently, oil dripping onto the instrument panel, temperature spiking into the red zone. Rosie's wings flapped under stress. The fabric threatened to tear entirely, but Carpenter's focus never wavered. Every dive, every rocket fired was a calculated risk, balancing destruction with survival. At 17:55, Carpenter identified a vulnerable Panther attempting to bypass American positions through a narrow valley. Terrain-following maneuvers were crucial. He dropped to 150 feet, dodging trees, hedgerows, and enemy fire. Dive angle, 36 degrees. Speed, 95 miles per hour. He fired 2 rockets simultaneously. Flames engulfed the Panther. The crew bailed out, scrambling across the ground. The American troops below cheered, advancing cautiously into cleared areas. Only 1 rocket remained. Carpenter knew its significance. It could tip the balance for the isolated American waterpoint crew still pinned behind a ridge. Spotting the Panther advancing toward them, he made the decision. He adjusted the damaged controls, banking carefully, descending to 100 feet and lining up the final rocket. The dive was steep, 38 degrees, engine groaning under the weight of stress and heat. He fired the rocket streaked through the air, impacting the Panther's turret. Explosion erupted, scattering debris across the field. Carpenter climbed slowly, wary of anti-aircraft fire, surveying the battlefield. 4 Panthers destroyed, 1 immobilized, the waterpoint crew safe, and morale among American soldiers significantly boosted. German forces were disoriented. Orders seemed chaotic, their advance slowed. The psychological edge of Rosie the Rocketer was evident observation. Planes were no longer ignored, and infantry and armor alike now hesitated under the threat of Carpenter's daring attacks. Fuel was dangerously low. With less than 3 gallons remaining, Carpenter initiated a cautious return to Lonville airstrip. Rosie's torn wings flapped violently in gusts of wind, the fabric fraying further with each maneuver. The engine rattled and coughed, temperature gauges deep in the red. Carpenter adjusted throttle and controls meticulously, maintaining stability while avoiding any sudden movements that could compromise the already weakened structure. Approaching the airstrip at 1825, Carpenter executed a low-altitude approach, hugging terrain to avoid enemy observation. Ground crew waved frantically, signaling readiness for landing. He touched down carefully, soft earth absorbing some impact. Rosie skidded slightly but remained upright. Carpenter climbed out, drenched in sweat and oil, inspecting the cub, torn wings, frayed cables, scorched fuselage. The aircraft had survived another day of improbable combat. Despite the damage, the mission's results were undeniable. German tactics had been disrupted, armored coordination delayed, and American positions stabilized. Carpenter's audacity had rewritten the tactical landscape, demonstrating that even a fragile observation, plane armed with ingenuity, could challenge armored warfare. Ground troops cheered, not only for the saved comrades but for the legend of Bazooka Charlie growing with each daring. Nightfall approached, yet Carpenter was far from done. The Battle of Aracourt had stretched over hours, and German units were regrouping for a final push before darkness concealed their movements. Rosie the Rocketer's damaged frame groaned with each maneuver, oil still dripping from the stressed engine. Carpenter knew that every second he remained airborne could prevent the collapse of isolated American positions. At 1905, he climbed to 1,000 feet, surveying the now dimly lit fields. The German infantry moved cautiously, aware of the Cub's lethal potential. Smoke from earlier destroyed Panthers and burning half-tracks lingered, casting eerie shadows across rolling farmland. Carpenter mentally mapped the battlefield, noting every ridge, ditch, and tree line that could provide concealment or tactical advantage for his low altitude. Attack patterns. Fuel was critical. Just under 2 gallons remained, but the mission demanded precision. A group of 4 Panther tanks and accompanying half-tracks were attempting to flank a secondary American position near Monner. Carpenter banked Rosie to the right, careful of the damaged aileron. Each movement had to be deliberate. A sudden dive or sharp turn could fracture the weakened fabric wings. Yet, his mind was unshakable. trained over decades of combat sorties and high school history lessons that taught him about strategy and sacrifice. At 1915, he descended to 150 feet. Weaving through hedgerows and tree lines, German infantry opened fire as soon as he came into view, tracers snapping through the dusky sky. Carpenter fired the first pair of rockets at the lead Panther. The explosion engulfed the tank in flames, immobilizing it immediately. The remaining tanks scattered, retreating behind ridges and smoke plumes. Carpenter adjusted for a second run, banking hard to avoid incoming fire, the rudder responding sluggishly. On this pass, he targeted a half-track, advancing too close to American positions. Range, 120 meters. Dive angle, 35 degrees. The rocket struck, sending the vehicle spinning into a ditch. Infantry nearby scrambled to cover, their morale faltering under the psychological impact of Carpenter's audacity. Each attack sent ripples through the German ranks. Observation planes were now credible threats, capable of disrupting armored formations with remarkable effectiveness. By 1945, Carpenter's remaining fuel was dangerously low, less than 1 gallon. Yet intelligence from ground units indicated a critical cluster of enemy tanks and trucks advancing from Jubel, aiming to bypass American defenses entirely. Time was running out. Carpenter descended to 100 feet, hugging terrain to minimize exposure. Trees whipped past, landing gear rattled, fabric wings threatened to tear completely, but his focus never wavered. This was more than flying, it was a calculated dance of life and death, executed with the precision of a strategist and the daring of a soldier, willing to risk everything. At 1950, he approached the Juval column. 3 Panthers led the advance, followed by 2 half-tracks and scattered infantry. Carpenter selected the lead Panther, dive angle 38 degrees, speed 95 miles per hour. He fired 2 rockets, both striking the engine deck and turret. Flames erupted instantly, sending the crew scrambling. The second Panther attempted evasive maneuvers but was hit by a third rocket from Carpenter's outboard launcher. Explosion engulfed the vehicle, wrecking the formation. German infantry fired sporadically, but their attempts were disorganized. They had learned Carpenter's attack patterns were unpredictable. Yet the Cub's small silhouette and aggressive maneuvers made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Carpenter's experience and instinct dictated every movement. He relied on altitude, terrain, and timing to outmaneuver the enemy while delivering maximum destruction. With the enemy floundering, Carpenter turned west, signaling a temporary retreat to regroup and reassess. Rosie the Rocketer, battered, torn, and scorched, responded sluggishly, but held together. The Cub had become a symbol of audacity, one man, and a fragile aircraft challenging armored warfare on its own terms. Ground crews waved frantically, readying to receive their pilot and tending to Rosie's structural damage for the inevitable next sortie. At 2010, Carpenter landed cautiously. The Cub's tailwheel bounced slightly, wings flexed under stress, but he managed a safe touchdown. The engines rattling, overheating, and occasional sputter were a constant reminder of the machine's fragility. Crew chiefs immediately assessed the damage. Torn fabric, frayed control cables, scorched fuselage. Rosie's survival was as much a testament to luck as to Carpenter's skill. Despite the wear and tear, the psychological and tactical effects of Carpenter's flights were profound. German armor was hesitant, flanking maneuvers delayed, and infantry morale shaken. Carpenter had rewritten the rules of engagement for the observation planes, proving that even a 65-horsepower fabric aircraft could dictate the pace of a mechanized advance with ingenuity, audacity, and skill. Carpenter debriefed with Combat Command via radio before sunset, relaying enemy positions, damage assessment, and fuel levels. Ground forces confirmed that his intervention had saved multiple American squads from encirclement, disrupted German coordination, and bought precious hours for reinforcements to establish defensive positions. Every sortie reinforced Carpenter's legend. Bazooka Charlie was more than a nickname, it was a testament to innovation, bravery, and relentless determination. Night had fully fallen over Aracourt, yet the echoes of battle lingered in the chilled air. Carpenter's sorties had taken their toll on both him and Rosie the Rocketer. The once pristine L4 Grasshopper now bore the scars of combat, fabric wings shredded in multiple areas, rudder frayed, fuselage scorched and dented. Yet the aircraft still flew, fragile but defiant, a flying testament to ingenuity and courage. By 21 o'clock, Carpenter had reviewed intelligence from the ground. German armor was attempting to regroup for a final push before darkness, hoping to isolate remaining American squads and reclaim lost territory. One unit, trapped near the Rhine Canal, was particularly vulnerable. About a dozen soldiers with no heavy support, exposed to approaching Panthers and Panzer IV. Combat Command A depended on him. Retreat was impossible. Delay meant certain death for the Americans. Carpenter climbed to 800 feet, hugging the terrain to minimize exposure. The Cub responded sluggishly. A gust of wind made the torn wings flutter violently. He adjusted throttle and yoke with delicate precision. Every movement was measured, every decision a gamble. The enemy was experienced, having learned from his earlier attacks. Anti-aircraft positions were now prepared specifically to intercept him. Small arms fire zipped past, bullets slicing through fabric, leaving ragged holes in Rosie's wings. At 21:15, he spotted the lead Panther approaching the vulnerable American position. Range, 200 meters. Dive angle, 40 degrees. Carpenter armed all remaining rockets, 3 on the right wing, 3 on the left. He nosed over into a steep dive, the Cub shuddering under unbalanced recoil. Flames streaked from the bazookas, narrowly missing fabric surfaces. The lead Panther's turret traversed, but it was too late. Carpenter fired all 6 rockets simultaneously. Explosions engulfed the tank. Ammunition cooked off. Turret lifted and settled askew, flames consuming the hull. The remaining Panthers hesitated, then attempted evasive maneuvers, but Carpenter, using terrain and low-altitude tactics, executed a rapid follow-up dive. 2 rockets struck the second Panther, setting it ablaze. Infantry nearby scattered, demoralized, unable to coordinate under the psychological assault of the unarmed observation plane that seemed to defy logic and mortality. Carpenter's attacks had altered the battlefield's momentum. German forces were disorganized, armored units hesitant, infantry morale fractured. By 21:40, all rockets had been Rosie, the rocketer's engine, rattled ominously. Temperature and oil pressure gauges pegged dangerously. Carpenter was miles from base, but retreat was imperative. Any additional sorties risked catastrophic failure. He glided low over the countryside, using remaining altitude and terrain to cover distance. The torn Cub struggled against wind and gravity. Its fragile frame creaked, fabric flapping in the dark like battle-worn wings of a mythic creature. At 21:55, Carpenter reached the airstrip at low. He executed a tense, precise landing, soft earth breaking the fall, tailwheel bouncing on impact. Rosie skidded slightly, but remained intact. Ground crews rushed forward, ready to contain fuel leaks and assess the damage. Carpenter, exhausted yet alive, climbed out fuel-soaked flight suit, clanging, minor cuts from broken instruments. Adrenaline still coursing. The aftermath of the day's sorties was staggering. 4 Panthers destroyed, 2 immobilized, dozens of infantry forced into defensive positions, 20 American soldiers saved from and German tactics permanently altered to treat observation planes as legitimate threats. Carpenter's bravery had created a temporary tactical advantage that shifted the momentum of the Aracourt battle. Over the following months, Carpenter continued these missions. 63 more bazooka attack sorties between September and December 1944. Official records credited him with 6 tanks destroyed, 2 Tiger tanks, 4 Panthers or Panzer IV, numerous armored cars, and dozens of soft-skinned vehicles. Witness accounts suggested higher numbers. Each sortie reinforced his legend: Bazooka Charlie, the Mad Major, Rosie the Rocketer, the names whispered in both awe and disbelief. By 19, Carpenter's luck ran into the unyielding force of nature. Diagnosed with terminal Hodgkin's disease at 32, doctors predicted 2 years at most. Yet Carpenter survived, outlasting expectations and continuing his teaching career in Urbana, Illinois. He returned to classrooms, sharing history with teenagers, embodying lessons learned in the crucible of battle. Charles Carpenter passed away on March 22, 1966. At age 53, his grave marker listed rank and dates. Silent on the daring missions, the tanks destroyed, or the improvised bazooka Cub that had reshaped armored warfare, leaving behind only the quiet echoes of courage, ingenuity, and relentless determination. The L4 Grasshopper, Rosie the Rocketer, disappeared post-war but was rediscovered decades later, restored by aviation historians and collectors. Though the aircraft would never again see combat, it remained a symbol of audacity, a reminder that in moments of extreme peril, innovation and courage could tip the scales of history. Carpenter's story demonstrates that war is not only fought with superior machinery or overwhelming force, but sometimes by ingenuity, daring, and the resolve to act when action is required. Regardless of the odds, Bazooka Charlie's legacy endures, reminding us of the extraordinary courage of ordinary men and the fleeting machines that carried them into history.